know she's been sitting there for a long time too.
Don't pay attention to her. She doesn't know what she's doing.
I'm sorry.
Oh, you saw and heard a lot.
It's been a long day.
Introduce yourself. All right.
Thank you, Presiding Officer Gonzalez, legislators. I'm Robert Cleary. I'm the Director of Procurement Compliance. I've been here since late May of this year. Prior to that, I worked for New York City for 26 years. I was Chief Contracting Officer for citywide purchasing at DCAS. I was the Chief Financial Officer for the Design and Construction Agency, where I was responsible for budget, expense, capital, revenue, payments, capital payments, expense payments. And I also had jobs as a Facilities Management Director and Capital Budget Manager as well. So I've done a bunch of different administrative things. I have a bachelor's degree in industrial engineering from Columbia University and a master's in public administration from NYU. And since I've been here, I've been working with a lot of different people, a lot of different departments on a lot of different procurement issues, some of which you've gotten to hear about firsthand today. And I'm very happy to be here, and I'm very happy to take any questions anybody has.
Legislator Dunn has a question. Oh, do you have a question? Okay.
Yeah, just real quick, as procurement compliance officer, the women, minority, and disabled veterans, you put on all the contracts, and you're going to make sure that that's part of. Is that part of your job? You think you'll be making sure that that is complied with federal and state mandates?
I will be working with the Office of Minority Affairs in that regard. What I've done so far, I'll be able to speak to that, and Ms. Braisley actually referred a little bit to it in her answers. I put together a team of representatives of several departments, several department heads and others that are very intensively involved in procurement. Minority Affairs has not been part of that team, but I've been working with them separately, and they've been included in some of the discussions. I've also been working on, and basically we've been reviewing the policies, looking at how we could firm up the policy, really kind of tighten some loose ends in the policy as it's written now, and find ways to standardize the approach and the practices used. And one of the elements of that, and this is the answer to your question, one of the elements of that is, and one of the common themes of today is that resources are thin. And resources are thin, but people aren't the only resources. And so we are working on a computer system that will capture and standardize this information. Right now, I think you're all aware that we're working on, the county's been working for a long time now on a contract routing system that would be able to send you electronic versions of the contract information for your review. What I've also started working with IT on is the system that would feed that prior to getting to the contract oversight review process. So we're building a system that will allow agencies to submit solicitations from our review and for OMA's review as necessary before it goes out to solicitation. And then after they conduct, the department conducts the solicitation, they would then submit the award proposal and the bid tabulation and all of the other documents that explain how you decided this was the best, lowest responsible vendor. And then we would approve that as well. The utilization plan would be part of that. And then it would go on to the contract routing process.
It would be specific on in that part of the contract that their response would be to, if so, who and how many people and
the system, we're writing this system very quickly. All right, so the needs assessment here has been keep it as flexible and as minimalist as possible, but still get it done in time. And we want to get this done this year.
It's always tweakable.
So right, exactly. We can always build in more bells and whistles later. But the way that it's been formulated so far, it's in testing now, in development really. Testing, I'm the only one testing it along with the developer. Is that there are check boxes that the department would indicate if there's an SDVBE, if there's a DBE, if there's an MWBE, or if there's a Section 3 requirement. And if there is, they would have to put in the comments section what the goals specific percentages are. Also under discussion is that we may be able to build the Office of Minority Affairs into that process so that they can see that directly. Otherwise, I would not approve the solicitation further without their say-so.
I wonder if Veteran Service Agency might be of help to you. There's so many disabled veterans coming out of the war now, men and women that are, it's often maybe they'd be able to help you too. I'm just a suggestion. And I'm very impressed with your background, and I'd like to welcome you aboard.
Thank you very much. Vendor outreach, which is really what you're referring to in that regard. More broadly, vendor outreach is a huge
No,
huge
disabled
element.
veteran, not gender. Disabled veteran, not gender.
No, I said vendor outreach.
Oh, vendor.
Yes, vendor outreach in general,
I thought you said gender.
not just for these 4 categories for OMA, but even for any vendor that we do business with, is really an important element of our success down the road in building our relationship with the vendor community. Thank you. So the resource that you suggested is very helpful. Thank you.
Okay, anyone else? Legislator Burnbaum. Oh, I'm sorry. I really haven't heard too much from Ellen. Go ahead.
Okay, thanks. Could you just clarify the chain of command? Are you part of the Shared Services Department, and there's also another position, Deputy Director of Purchasing? Is that correct?
There is, yes.
So does that person report to you, or how does it work? And your staff?
Presently, I report to Deputy County Executive Ward. The Purchasing Department reports to Deputy County Executive Naughton. We work closely together, but there's not a reporting structure between us.
And do you have staff as well?
I do not have staff, although there is a line for a deputy in the budget proposed for next year.
Okay, thank you.
I have to go to Minority Leader Kavan.
Now? Okay. I'm ready now. How are you, Ms. Cleary? I just have a few questions, and I think Legislator Dunn and Legislator Birnbaum talked about a few of them, so my questions are going to get cut down in half. But I know when we met in my office a little while back, a few months, we talked about some of the goals and objectives. One of the things we talked about was Department of Purchasing, but I believe one of the things that we wanted to talk about actually was the goals and objectives of the office, and I think you started to elaborate a little bit about that with Legislator Dunn. But I just wanted to hear your ideas. I mean, obviously, as I'm sure you all know, your position was created shortly after the conviction of former Senator Dean Skelos. And one of the initiatives, I guess, of the county executive was to try to add some more transparency as well as clarity to the procurement process. And I'm just curious, have you been able to accomplish that in your time here so far, or what your goals are to try to accomplish that?
Okay, so absolutely, integrity and transparency are the driving points of the job, really, at this point. The elements, I came in, I met with a lot of departments, reviewed some processes, reviewed the systems that we had, and I formulated a several-point plan to attack this issue, to be able to produce some results as an individual without a staff, working in the context of the distributed procurement processes that we have in the county. And the first element was rework the policy. All right, so we have the county-wide policy, we have an internal control guideline. Both of them had certain distinct holes. This is comparing them to my experience previously in New York City with the Procurement Policy Board rules. I'm sorry,
I'm sorry, not to cut you off, Can you tell me, as you go through each of the points, has it been accomplished or not? Or has it been implemented?
I'll tell you where we are. I mean, everything is in process to one degree or another. It's been 4.5 months, so.
Okay. And does it require an investment on behalf of the county? Does it require us
Yes, I'll answer that.
Thank you.
So, for the policy, for instance, we had a policy that very clearly spoke to the different methods of procurement, what the city calls methods of source selection. So you do a formal sealed bid for this, you do an RFP for this, you do a construction bid for this, you do a construction RFP for this, right? What it didn't have is a section that explained what the required elements of the procurement process itself, regardless of the method, are. So we built that in, right? We built in some contract administration elements. We built in some subcontracting and other elements that really kind of round out the way that a contract is developed, put together, solicited, and then administered. Right? So that's the policy, and then the internal control guideline is largely best practices and practical applications of those policies. And there we spoke to certain other elements of the structure that can be improved, basically, the county's structure. So this has been, we have weekly meetings, bi-weekly meetings actually, and a lot of conversations in between for several weeks, about 10 weeks, where we put together our proposed revisions of the policy. And that is still going under review, all right? So I can't say when it necessarily will be finalized, but there's a lot of significant information in there that I think that we can share with departments, and that will start to firm up the process, right? It'll improve the integrity insofar as it will clarify what the requirements are to determine integrity, what the steps are to take to make sure that you're checking that, and the computer system that's being developed will also capture those elements as it goes through. So that everybody will be, again, using a standard process. It'll be recorded on the system. You won't lose paperwork because it'll all be electronically stored. And those elements will go a long way to improving ensure the integrity. It's not that we're improving the integrity that was already being found and determined, but recording how that decision was made, right? So that'll improve the transparency of that process. The computer system also will be used ultimately to produce an external-facing database of existing contracts, which will provide transparency to the public regarding the contracts that we have in place. So I think that those elements between those two go a long way. Now, other things that we're doing to improve the process that will have an impact on this. We're revising our vendor outreach policy. We've revised some of the purchasing information, procurement information on the website. I've added a page just speaking to procurement compliance. And as these other systems come online, we'll be adding additional information on the web. IT has been a great partner, and that's about half of the program that I'm working on. They've been a great partner for this. We're also working with the not-for-profit task force, the nonprofit task force, in trying to identify ways to make it less likely there's going to be lapses or to minimize the effects of lapses. I think there are structural problems in the way that the budget cycle and the funding programs work that make it difficult to avoid lapses at the beginning of the year in nonprofit contracts, but we're doing everything we can to identify those vendors that could use additional attention, as additional assistance. Let's see, I think that's pretty much mostly the program that I've been working on. Now, what does it cost? It costs my time. It costs investments of existing resources in IT, working with Ms. Brazeley and a lot of other departments. It takes their time. It is not taking other contract costs. It is not, at this point, a problem that I don't have staff. I think that it will be greatly beneficial to have a deputy next year because after we've firmed up the policy and after we've got the systems in place and after we've got the departments kind of doing everything in a standard fashion, we're going to need to do an awful lot of training. There's going to be a lot of outreach, there's going to be a lot of hand-holding, there's going to be a lot of need to be in multiple places at once, which I'm not very good at. So that's where I'm going to need that additional resource. But at this point, it has actually worked very well, and I've gotten a huge amount of support from the departments and from the administration to be able to put all this together and move it forward quickly.
When do you envision implementation?
The first phase of the project ideally will be finished by the end of the year, so that we're hopefully catching the beginning of the new fiscal year with the new policies and the new practices, and we'll be training. We're planning to train some nonprofit organizations on the proper filing of disclosure forms to the best that we understand the requirements in the next month or so. We'll be training staff as we're preparing for the new fiscal year. So it's an ongoing rollout of the process. I've already made the changes that I intend to make right away on the website. Down the road, when we have the external database, that will be loaded onto the website. When we have performance metrics, that'll be next year, that'll be on the website. So there's going to be other things that will be added in as we move along.
It sounds like you've got a pretty strong handle in terms of what you want to do, and obviously, you know, we want to see the procurement process be enhanced, and want to make sure you have the resources you have to be able to secure that. So if your testimony today is that you have the resources you need at this time, please let us know when you believe you are being inhibited from being able to move forward without the resources.
As I said, I've received great support. I couldn't ask for more support than I've gotten, and I've been able to do what I need to do. One of the questions that was asked, and this was not asked of me, so maybe it's unfair of me to say it, but it was asked of Ms. Braisley, what can legislators do to assist with her program? And I can speak to that a little bit from my perspective, but also working very closely with their office. Again, restoring our relationship with the vendor community is essential. I think that we as a county have done a lot of damage to that relationship ultimately. I think that there was a great deal of confusion due to the things that I heard about as soon as I got here. A great deal of confusion about the changing requirements for disclosures. I am not changing those requirements. I'm not asking anybody else to change those requirements. I think that they're sufficient for the purposes that we have, that we need to make sure that we're getting the information we need to make reasonable, rational, justifiable decisions. I think that if we change the process in March of next year, the same way we did this year, or whenever it was, it preceded me, it causes a great deal of confusion, and we already have a process that is cumbersome enough that it causes delays. As I said, the nonprofit community already knows that they're not getting a contract that's effective on January 1 for services that are effective and mandated on January 1. And so we're trying to, again, not exacerbate that issue. So stabilizing the situation is extremely important for my purposes, and I think for the county as well. And I think also for the Office of Minority Affairs. And that also gives us an opportunity when we approach vendors to say, you should be interested in doing business with the county. You know, to be able to look them in the eye and say, we've got a handle on this, we know that it's been difficult in the past, we're managing it, it's calming down, we're stabilizing, we've got a better handle on the information flow. We're going to be able to make this work, and it's worth your while to invest the time and the effort and jump through the hoops necessary to do business with us.
Just two final things. One, you had mentioned that obviously you had worked on the policy. If we can see a copy of it, provided to, I guess, our side, I'm sure the president also want to see it on her side. If we have a copy of it, if it can, is that something you can share with us?
Well, it's a draft. It's under review right now. When it's finalized, absolutely. Yeah.
Do you mind if we can set up some meetings where we can have input to make sure?
That would be fine.
Okay. All right. I'll set something up with my council as well. And we'll set something up. The second thing I did want to find out, and obviously, as you well know, we have been pushing for, with regard to the Department of Investigations, we have been pushing for an independent source. I know Mrs. Myrell is going to come up next and speak, and we have also given testimony that we are fine with the fact that if she was given a contract, we believe that would provide the independence that's necessary. The question I ask for you is, since your time here and since Mrs. Myrell's time here, have you worked in conjunction with her and her office on any investigations, or has she leaned on you for any other investigations?
She's part of my contract team. It's not an investigation.
I'm not too sure I understand what that means. She's part of your contract team.
Meaning the project team that I assembled to work on these objectives that I spoke of, okay. The policy, and I think that's been a very helpful relationship, frankly. I think that we support each other well. I have not participated in any investigations, I think that there's a real element of culture change necessary to make this whole thing work. There's a real element of the existing culture that has prevented it from working. And so the more people start to understand how the outside world, outside the county, understands what good public procurement is, the better off we all are. The more that people realize that everybody has to take ownership of the result, given that everybody has a hand in its processing. The fact that there are certain ways to interpret what is a responsible bid and what is not. And these are not concepts that I've pulled out of my head. These are concepts that are applied broadly across the country. The NIGP offers very good courses about it. In New York City, there's a training requirement for chief contracting officers. These are just standard best practices. A few of us are going to be going to a SAMPO, State Association of Municipal Purchasing Officials regional conference out in Riverhead in a few weeks. And I think that kind of exposure is going to be helpful in the long run, because everybody here has kind of, the procurement has been distributed to the different departments, and each department has developed its own culture and its own ways of coming to interpretations of what is and isn't correct. But from a procurement perspective, it's a legal basis, it's a legal process, it's based in state law, it's based in charter, it's based in the interpretation of the charter here and the law. There needs to be some rather deep-seated understanding of where that's coming from, what the driving philosophy is. That the best value to the county is the lowest, most competitive, most open and fair result. And to the degree that you are less open or less fair, because it is, for instance, a sole source, which isn't a fair process, but it is a justifiable process under certain circumstances. People need to be able to know that thought process very internally to make the right decisions when you're in your office, making your decisions day by day. And that's really, I think, ultimately what will help the most, along with repairing the relationship with the vendor community.
You mentioned two things, but one thing I wanted to harp on is making sure we have a transparent and fair process. Do you ever feel there's a need, I mean, in your experience, have you ever seen the need for unsolicited bid to be awarded to a contractor?
There are times when you negotiate contracts directly with a vendor.
But have you ever seen a contract come before a body that was unsolicited? Meaning that we never RFP'd the services. Would that be a red flag to you? We never RFP'd the services. We never requested the services. Someone told us this product works for you. Would that present a red flag?
That frankly, that's a hypothetical. I don't know that I'm comfortable answering.
It was the AppTech contract.
It's something I've not seen. Is I guess the answer to your question.
That's the answer to my question.
Yeah. I mean, I can say this. Back in my facilities management days, one day, I got a call from somebody in California who said, "I've got a great deal on light bulbs. You'll love these light bulbs. They're so cheap. They're great. You'll love them." I said, "No, thanks. We have light bulbs. I don't need them." Wait a few weeks, and a box of light bulbs shows up in my office. So we didn't pay for the light bulbs, even though we got the bill. We shipped them back, and we still got the bill. That is the closest I've ever come to an unsolicited contract.
Yeah, but let me be clear, because I hear some banter. The contract was RFP'd, but the RFP did not originate from the county, from what I understand this correctly. It was AppTech reaching out to the county, telling us that we had a product that could work for you.
Yeah,
which I think from our side,
I'm not really prepared to
I'm not asking him to comment on AppTech. I'm asking him, has he seen those types of transactions occur in his experience? That's what I was asking. And would that present a red flag in your experience? That's what I'm asking.
I mean, I don't think I have anything that really I could compare that to, honestly. So I don't think that
I appreciate your honesty. Nothing further than that.
Somebody wants to go home. Legislator Carr.
Thank you. Hi. So in the budget for next year, you got an employee to help you. What will that person be doing?
That will be my deputy. It hopefully will be somebody with some experience working. I don't have anybody in mind, but hopefully somebody who has some experience working elsewhere in procurement, honestly. It doesn't have to be. I can train somebody here. We're already doing some training just by the virtue of meeting with people. And that would be my eyes and ears when I can't be present. That would be somebody who can train in my absence. That would be somebody who can provide assistance with troubleshooting the computer systems that people will be using, understanding the interpretations of the policy, and also probably doing some things like making sure that I don't lose track of correspondence and what have you. I mean, there's going to be some of that as well. I think that as it gets to the point where I'm reviewing a significant majority of the procurement documents going through the county, I'm going to need help. The volume's going to be quite substantial.
Right, okay. That's understandable. Very often we see bids and sometimes RFPs that only attract one bidder, which raises concerns, are we getting the best possible deal? Have you looked at whether, and I'm gleaning from what you said that you have, but have you looked specifically at whether our procedures and practices are causing this? Or if we could change that to perhaps attract more bidders?
So I think that increasing vendor outreach is one of the elements of the policy, and that's meant to be the best defense against that result. The reality is that every office gets single bids. Sometimes it just happens. There are some commodities that are sole sourced by nature, and you're not even bidding them. But there are several cases where you'll put something out, you'll have 5, 10, 15 vendors on a bidder's list, and you'll still only get a single result. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's a problem, but it does make it more difficult to assure best value, fair and reasonable cost, basically. And also, let's face facts, if you get one bid, you're more likely to say, I'm sure they have the capacity, even if there's a little bit of a question about whether they have the capacity, because you need that good or service. Right. And so you're willing to work with them, but you're going to have a long, hard conversation with them before you award the contract. So there are different calculations. Sometimes when you go out and you get a single bid, you do want to rebid, because sometimes you see, somebody says, well, why did the spec say this? If you just change this, it would be more open, I would have been able to bid, right? So there are times when you will actually be able to attract attention, more responses by tweaking the solicitation itself. Sometimes, there are vendors that are perfectly capable, but they miss the solicitation. It can be as easy as that. Now, what the city does, and what I proposed for here, is a single bid analysis. So that when you get a single bid, you contact a representative portion of other bidders on the list and ask them, why didn't you submit a bid? And usually the answers are going to be, I didn't see the solicitation, I'm too busy, I don't want to work with you, I don't sell that, right? Usually it's I don't sell that or I didn't see the solicitation. Those are the two most common. And if that's what it is for everybody across the board, then you go back and you say, well, what did we pay for this the last time? What's the market on the web? How else can we compare this pricing and this vendor to make sure that they're the right fit for what we need? And then you'll award to them and you'll feel good about it, and it'll probably work fine. If on the other hand you find that there are elements where I've seen instances where somebody went out with a solicitation for 8 cans per pack, and the market typically provides 6 cans per pack. Well, you're not going to get a lot of bids for that, and if you do, it's probably not a good price. So you should restructure the bid and resolicit. You're probably targeting that vendor in the first place if you're going out with a flawed spec, or I shouldn't say that. More likely, you're living with a spec that is outdated and nobody's bothered to look at the market and understand that the market has changed, and we're not doing that anymore. New York City had that problem with toilet paper. We were using a spec that was decades old, and it turned out that we were paying several dollars a case more per box because our toilet paper was a different size than the industry standard. So and that's a huge commodity actually for standard commodity orders. So.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. You said something interesting about how our vendor relationship could be better. And another interesting thing that you said is that there's an element of culture change that needs to happen. And what is our vendor relationship like, and what do you think could be improved? And also, how are we so different in our culture from other places? What is it about Nassau? Are we stuck in the 50s? Is it that sort of thing? I mean, what is it?
I mean, there are parts of New York City that are still stuck in the 50s.
Yeah.
That was the toilet paper problem. We've set up some structural barriers to entry that are dissuading vendors from being interested in participating.
Is one of them possibly the fee?
There are,
The fee charged to vendors for online registration? I know we're getting about $250,000 in online registration fees. Do you think that is an impediment to maybe some of the smaller vendors?
well, it's possible that vendors can consider that in their response, whether they respond or not, and
Okay.
what their price is. There are other elements that can have an impact that I've heard multiple times, include the changing disclosure forms and the confusing disclosure requirements, which is why we're offering the training and why we're trying to really nail down these are acceptable answers, and then when there is a problem, clean it up as quickly as possible, move it along. And frankly, the county's payment processes are cited quite often as well.
Okay. What is your role vis-a-vis sealed bids?
Well, the formal sealed bids typically are processed or are processed by the Office of Purchasing.
Yeah.
And again, I'm not structurally in that line. We work closely together. If there's a question, I may be called in to consult on an issue.
Okay. All right. And then you would know what's in the sealed bid, obviously, in that case.
Yes.
Yeah. And what is your role with respect to RFPs?
Well, RFPs will be running through the solicitation process that I'm establishing, and I'll also have a role in the contract writing system. So I'll have a lot of touch points in that process going forward when we're up and running. Right now, I'm really working more on system-wide issues.
Okay.
I'm not really looking at individual procurements by and
Okay.
large. I've been called in on a few issues here or there.
Yeah, it sounds like you're doing more of a systemic
Right.
review and then a fix.
Right, because I think that ultimately is the only way to do this
Yeah,
job.
instead of nitpicking in here and there.
Yeah,
All right, thank you very much.
thank you.
Legislator Barnell.
I'm sorry. I'll give you.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Hi, good evening. I just have one quick question. You talked about the disclosure forms being somewhat confusing or cumbersome. New York City, what did they have in place in terms of disclosure?
So the New York City process is similar. I mean, the questions are very similar. It looked awful familiar when I got here. The process is a little different, though. The Vendex system is their vendor exchange system. It's an online system, self-reported by vendors. And that captures effectively the business history and principal questionnaire information, as well as performance evaluations and some financial tax issues, things like that, and any cautions as well. So it's a pretty integrated process for reviewing the basics of vendor integrity. They require a full Vendex submission, including principal information, every 3 years, and then within 90 days of an award, certificate of no change or a revised form or a certificate of change, depending on the circumstances. So what we're doing effectively is very similar to Vendex, but we're doing it on individual forms, on paper, and we're requiring it with every solicitation almost effectively. I mean, there are some, if you get 2 contracts in the same week to the same vendor from different departments, the forms are reasonably transferable. But by and large, they are requested for every solicitation.
Okay, so as you centralize and automate us, and I guess you'll at some point give us some kind of suggestions in terms of how you would like to see maybe some legislation kind of modify our process, or I guess integrate it better?
Well, I mean, one bit of good news that I can take no credit for, the county had already developed, as it had developed the contract writing system and the forms before I got here, it also had developed a data vault, which is for not-for-profit vendors. We're going to expand it to include for-profit vendors. There's really no reason why it couldn't. And it's basically a database of shared information similar to what Vendex does. So when that vendor sends in their disclosure forms, it'll go into the system and other departments should have access to see it to be able to review. I'd like to build in performance evaluation information and things like that as well. So that will go a long way to achieving that. Now, as far as legal changes, there are things that I could suggest down the road. We're not prepared to do that at this point. I think that there's a lot of work to be done before we get to actual legal issues.
Excited to hear about the performance being tied into the process, so that's great. Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
There being no other
No,
questions?
I have a question.
Oh, Legislator DeRicci would.
Thank you. Just as far as the disclosure forms go, do you look into anything as far as any past history with the companies with issues with possibly paying prevailing wages or any lawsuits that they're involved with?
Prevailing wage, if there are any red flags in the prevailing wage area, it should be addressed as part of the award assessment process. You do have to look at those things. One of the things that's flagged in the system that we're developing is whether or not something is subject to prevailing wage. But that's the department, which the departments typically that are subject to prevailing wage requirements are familiar with these processes and do research them pretty thoroughly is what I've seen so far. So if there's an issue, somebody may come to me and ask a question, and I can give my opinion. But that will be something that they'll have to indicate in the system is a requirement, and then they'll have to indicate that it's been affirmed that there aren't any issues as part of the responsibility determination.
So do you have any, do you take any steps yourself as far as researching, or do you have any way to research companies to see if there were past issues?
I mean, there are several ways to research these things. We are in the process of getting access, limited access to Vendex. So we will be able to check the city's records. That's an easy one. But then there's also a lot of other information that's available through other sources.
Do you also anticipate checking like lawsuits that are either against the company or the company is brought against either municipalities or I don't know, like different?
That I think that will take some work to develop an effective policy.
Do you plan on going in that direction?
I mean, it is something that we looked into for certain contracts in my previous.
There's index checks that aren't too difficult to do, right? As far as
some, yes, but I mean, for instance, if your LexisNexis is one option, it's an expensive option. It is expensive, relatively speaking. It's not a cheap database to get. And there are some contracts where it's more important than others, is I guess what I would say. So for instance, in the city, you only do a full-blown Vendex check and full-blown responsibility determination for contracts over $100,000. Now, most of the contracts here are much less than $100,000.
I don't know, a lot of them aren't. A lot of them really aren't. A lot of them are quite pricey. I don't know if we have access to that system through our county attorney's office. We may even already have it. We probably do.
Well, as I said, I think right now it would be on a case-by-case basis where there might be cases where it makes sense to
I think
do
it would be a good idea to mandate it over, even if you wanted to stay at the $1 million, you'd be surprised how many contracts come through here at $1 million. I heard there's a lot of questions, or there's sometimes like a gray area between purchase orders and contracts. And as you know, purchase orders, how do you think you can delineate between the two, and what steps could you do?
Well, I mean, they're different processes. They're defined as different processes. So, contracts are over $10,000. Personal services contracts. I'm not sure I understand the questions.
Well,
I guess.
I think there is a real difference between like a purchase order and a blanket order. Often, a lot of times, they don't come for us if it's a purchase order. So I'm wondering how we can kind of close that gap as far as making sure there's enough oversight with the purchase orders as well as regular contracts.
Well, I mean, the reason that the purchase orders don't come before you are because they're solicited by competitive bid,
Right.
right? And not to say that anything could be looked at, absolutely. Competitive bidding, formal competitive sealed bidding per GML 103 is the most open and fair competitive process of procuring goods or services available on the planet, as far as we know. All right. So it is generally the gold standard by which any other procurement method is compared. So I'm not saying that you don't review them. You still, for large, substantial amounts of commitment that are obtained by competitive bid, like construction or like large bid contracts, other bid contracts. You do a pretty rigorous review of the vendor's responsibility and responsiveness before you award the contract. And I know that there is a point at which it comes to the legislature, over $100,000, I believe.
Right.
But most of you guys are seeing most of the big stuff. You're seeing all the service contracts, pretty much all of the service contracts, $1,000 and up, and personal services, as it's interpreted, is pretty much any service, just about. And you're seeing all the construction contracts. So there's not a lot of things that you're missing, but if you were curious to see what it is you're missing, then I'm sure that information is available.
Well, again, it's been brought to our attention that the purchase orders do seem to be a little bit of a wiggle room way to get it around, possibly coming to us, even for $100,000. I mean, I know it doesn't sound like a lot of money, but it is. I mean, it adds up. If you look at some of the things that, a little bit here, a little bit there in the past, we've had a few 24,000, now that the standard's changed, but.
Well, but again, those 24,000 were service contracts, at least the ones that I'm familiar with, right? And that's why the threshold is $1,000.
Right. I know, we fought for that for a long time, but with the vendors, I hear the complaint I get is that they're not paid on time. It takes a long time for them. Like, for instance, if they get awarded the contract, they do the work. Have you run into that yet, or have you been faced with that?
Well, it hasn't affected me directly, but it affects the vendor community and our relationship with it.
That's when you were talking about improving our reputation or something, I think that might have a lot to do with it. And that might not be in your exact, scope of work, but I have a feeling that if you kept an eye on that as well, it would improve our reputation quite a lot.
Well, I am not in a position to take on that at this time.
Right.
And I'm not in a position to take on that under structural reasons. For structural reasons, my job description doesn't include it. But even if my job description did, I think that the stuff that we're working on now is the most important element that we can.
But again, I've had a number of companies tell me that they hesitate to work for the county because I'm just saying, if your scope is to look at the improvement of their reputation.
I also should say that people complain about the city's payment practices as well.
Right.
So this is not new, and this is not unique to here.
But what our concern has been, and as you know, we've been told, we had the district attorney here who told us that there's investigations going on. We've all been told personally, you got a pass last time because you didn't realize all this that's going on, but next time we're going to hold you. We could actually, as legislators, be held responsible if we did something, i.e., awarding the contract and then later found out that there was something we missed.
Can I ask you who told you that we got to pass this time?
Well,
I'm just curious.
Well, the district attorney said that we were still under investigations. We did get by saying, we really weren't aware, we didn't ask some of the questions maybe we should have with some of the investigations.
But somebody said we got to pass this time, we better look out next time?
I think
Who said that?
the tone is there. We now are aware of all these investigations, all right? And we definitely know that these things are going on.
So it's a conclusion that you drew as opposed to somebody telling me. I just want to make sure I understand. I don't mean to.
All right, no, it's okay. You do that. The bottom line is we're aware. We read Newsday also. There are a lot of investigations going on. People all are very aware of where we are, which is why we're hesitating on issuing bonding for future contracts. And the bottom line is actually I have been told by different people that we should be held to a higher standard now that we're aware of things that could have gotten through. So
our hesitation
All right.
again with bonding, I don't have to reveal who I spoke
Okay,
with.
all right.
The bottom line is we are hesitant to move forward, although there are things we really have no idea how much we want to move forward on. But we do have to make sure that we are now at a standard where we can feel comfortable putting our own reputation and our own vote at risk by going ahead and awarding contracts and therefore bonding for them. I really hope, and I guess this isn't a question as much as a plea, that you do everything you can to make sure that all of these issues are addressed, as far as any kind of conflict, as far as donations, all that. Just as one of our layers. Is it going to be our only layer? No, we probably need additional layers as well, but I'm asking you as a legislator, if there's anything you need from us or me or anyone, please let us know. And I do hope you feel comfortable if you do see a problem that you can report it. So.
Thank you. Yeah, no, if I ever saw something that was clearly a problem, I would be reporting it to the appropriate authorities. And I have not had to do that in my past. I don't necessarily expect it to happen here. My job is to ensure procurement compliance. Effectively, it's no process, no human process that I know of is perfect. But we certainly can tighten the screws an awful lot. And again, standardize the practices and get everybody kind of thinking in the same way about these things, and we'll make collective decisions better.
And I just have to tell you, I'm very happy to hear you say the things you're saying. But do you have any idea about a timeline as far as when you're going to feel comfortable with this program?
Well, as I said, I'm racing to try to get most of these things up and running by the end of the year.
Thank you.
Okay, are there any other questions for Mr. Cleary?
Good luck and thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Cleary. Before we go to the next speaker, Frank, you need a break, or are we okay? All right, let's finish up the hearing. Next speaker would be the Commissioner of Investigations, Donna Merrill.